Like, I didn't even feel like I had a choice to not go into entertainment. And because of how I was raised, where my father was at the top of the pyramid and I had to do everything in service of my father, acting was very similar.
Welcome to Story and Craft. Now, here's your host, Mark Preston.
Okay, welcome back. Another episode of Story and Craft. How are you? Good to have you here. My name is Mark Preston. If you're new to the show, glad to have you checking out this episode as we sit down with Unit Zappa. Of course, her father, the legendary Frank Zappa. She had a wonderful career of her own. I remember her, like many Gen X kids, with her brother Dweezil Zappa. They did the MTV thing together for a while. But right now, she's got a brand new memoir out. It is called Earth to Moon. It covers a lot of ground about growing up in the Zappa household and kind of how those things continued to affect her into adulthood. Some unique stories in there and a really great storyteller. She did a wonderful job of just making it just interesting to read. A real pleasure. Hey, do me a favor, real quick, if you would, grab that cell phone or whatever you're listening to the show on. Go to the podcast app. Make sure to follow Story and Craft. That way you get notified every time we have a new episode. Also, like the show, ring the bell, whatever your podcast app does. And what you can do also is leave a review, leave some stars, whatever feels good, go for it. Also, storyandcraftpod.com. The website, you can go there, find out about past episodes, past guests. You can send me a note. It's all up there. Just head on over to storyandcraftpod.com. So I tell you what, let's get after it. Today is Unit Zappa Day, right here on Story and Craft. So where are you joining me from?
From the East Coast.
You grew up in the LA area. Or how long have you been on the East Coast?
This is a place where I decided to finish my memoir, but I've been bouncing around between Los Angeles and New Mexico and New York and Connecticut and just jumping around trying to figure out where to be next.
By the way, I just got your wonderful memoir here just a couple days ago, and I've been trying to read it, but I'm laying in bed because I'm one of those people that cannot read without it just putting me to sleep. So how does it feel to have it completed and just out in the world? Is it a sense of relief?
I didn't plan past just getting it done and crossing that finish line. And so now this is the weird part where the introvert has to go interact with people because writing is a profession that is right for my temperament, my nervous system to retreat and just work by myself. So this part is a little weird. People are asking me just lighthearted questions about some of the most upsetting things. The stuff that they focus on is also fascinating.
And I could see where you may run into or encounter folks who are just trying to be a little bit flip, considering who your father was. And they're just focusing on the cultural aspect of things, not the actual what's happening in the home. And I just thought it was not charming is a little bit of a reductive phrase, but how you talked about the home and it was not like y'all bounced around a lot. Y'all kind of planted roots and this is where your home was. This was the epicenter. I haven't gotten far enough in, but is that still a family home? Do y'all still have that home?
We don't hold that home. And my mother was a military kid and my father, his family moved around a lot. And so I think that it's just natural to want to have one spot that's your own, that you plant roots. The difference is that it was Gail Zappa and Frank Zappa, who I was introduced to as Gail and Frank from birth. They both had Gail's sense of whimsy and Frank's wildness, that the space, there was a studio in the house that started off as a 2-bedroom ranch style house and just kept growing into a Robinson Crusoe. I forget the Winchester house where it's like stairways that go to doors that don't open or doors that open onto brick walls. And it was under construction Monday through Saturday. Honestly, my entire life, it was anything that struck their fancy.
When you said it was 2-bedroom, when I read that, I was like, how could you fit the entire family in a recording studio?
Oh, that's when it started. There was like a half floor. Gail would go to salvage yards and get old submarine doors and submarine windows and then get stuff that was from Bali and India. And I called the house style Mediterranean because it was Tudor, it was Mediterranean. It was everything. The jungle in the backyard. At one point, she had a spiral staircase made with the cards you would use the ESP cards where you'd practice remote viewing and sending and receiving psychic messages. She had those symbols put on the staircase.
Take a look at the back here of the book, and you have like you have Allegra Houston, Rosanna Arquette. I noticed like these are folks who have families who are creatives around them. Was that kind of by design? You wanted to touch base with these folks you knew
Creatives
in the world?
spend time with creatives. It's because we have a
Uh,
common language of just we work in that arena in a
mhm.
state of play. Your emotions are paint colors. Your experiences are material for storytelling. It's just I'd love to make other friends, but I don't meet them.
What was your ecosystem growing up? You had the Zappa household, but were you spending
Right.
time with other folks whose families were in the industry, or what was that like?
The neighborhood where I grew up didn't have sidewalks, so you didn't get a chance to know your neighbors because you couldn't walk anywhere. You drive everywhere, and then people stayed in their houses. So the terrain of the area doesn't really lend itself to getting to know people very easily. And it's not until you get into school that you start to see who your community is. And early on, I went to public school, rode the bus, and really enjoyed. I didn't realize until later that I actually am an academic. I have an academic mind. I love learning. I'm an autodidact. I dive into any subject. But in terms of growing up in a famous household, I met so many of my heroes so early on. And so it made me feel like, oh, that's all it is at the end of you make it to the tippy top, you're just partying and having small talk. It just wasn't that interesting to me. So yeah, I think it's an advantage because then it made me think beyond fame and beyond some of the stuff that maybe other people aspire to.
I think you were 14. I think you did an episode of Letterman. And it's funny how your dad said the whole Valley Girl thing was not really designed to be something cute. It was like a social commentary on the Valley. But did they push for like normalcy for you, to like normal friends or no way and associated with the entertainment industry? Was that something they pushed for? Was it where were you left to your own devices to make the friends you make and whatnot?
My parents were not people that were necessarily very social. My father was just committed to his creativity. So there was not really, we didn't have sit down meals. The two meals we had that were sit down were Christmas and Thanksgiving. He was just dedicated to his creativity. He would spend all his time either touring 7 to 9 months out of the year or just creating. And he didn't do drugs and he didn't drink. And so it was just, he didn't want any obstacle between him and his creativity. And so this was passed on to all of us. I think we also have that desire to just be in that, again, that pure expression. And then the inner landscape is the uncharted territory that's more interesting than, again, party, small talk, and this kind of thing. I don't think there was, I got to stay famous. It was just like, I want to keep being able to make my work and make a living from doing my work. He was a very hard worker. We all are.
Yeah, I got that from reading. It seemed like he was very, like you said, focused. He was very focused on what he was
Yeah.
doing.
When he got
And
cancer later in his life, he was mad that he could only work 40 hours a week. He really was he just was, that's where he got his dopamine hit. That's the thing that just was always moving through him.
as far as like the impetus for writing this, obviously we all have a story. We want to tell our story. Sometimes it's more for us. And in fact, the prologue of the book, you said, like, this is for me also. Was this an effort to get all these pieces assembled? And what was the impetus for writing this for the most part?
The impetus was the events that come later in the chapters, which if you haven't got to yet. But what happened was at the end of Gail's life, I had come to understand that we were just not naturally compatible, shall we say? This is an understatement. And I had made peace with that fact, and I assumed that she had too. But when she died, she left all the intellectual property to my two younger siblings that I helped raise. And this was a shock to my nervous system. It was such a massive betrayal. It wasn't the stuff. It was the idea that she wished two of us and not the other two, even though we were all her actual children. And as a parent, this is an unimaginable idea to me. And so this was a real turning point in my life where I had to go back and reevaluate what is family, what is trust, what is connection, everything. I had to relook at my entire childhood, all the things I thought were fun, happy, safe, whatever the list is. And so that was that was the journey. And so I guess if I thought, if I'm struggling with this and I have resources, what is somebody else's experience? And they don't. So if you take away nothing else from the book, love yourself. And if you're going to drop a will, make it even Stevens. Have a final loving offering, even if you don't get along with the people in your life. It just is. It's the kindest thing you can do. And another thing I really love is I had a teacher that would say, it's better to do a good thing very quickly and a bad thing very slowly. So slowly, in fact, that you hopefully never do it.
With your folks, your mother in particular, was the relationship in your mind, was it fraught? Was it difficult throughout your life? Is this something that really was starting to culminate towards the end of her life?
As I went back and researched it, because people would say, did you see it coming? And then when I went back and really looked at my journals and looked at the events in my life, it all tracked. I just, for example, they were both Gail and Frank were estranged from many of their family members. So there was the culture of estrangement, but I just didn't think it would happen to me. I didn't think that there'd be that kind of dismissal and that kind of, just that kind of erasure. You just don't, it was, again, as a parent, it's an unimaginable final say on a singular exit. You don't get a second chance at making those corrections. And but it's been a journey. And that's one of the, I think, the universal things about my book, even though some of the people they're famous people that I'm learning my life lessons opposite. I'm still just learning life lessons. It could have just been somebody I went to school with. That's just same as anybody, but they happen to be people that have recognizable names and careers.
Did you notice as you got older, you start seeing things through a different prism, especially when you have a child? You have, like when I had my children, I started going, you start becoming a little bit more forgiving. But at the same time, you also become like a little bit more like critical of, really, you didn't see this? You always think the grass is greener when you're a kid. And then you start knowing years later, decades later, oh, their life had stuff going on also. But your perception is, I got this weird thing going on here. Grass is greener over there. And I recognized that, like I said, is a little bit more forgiving, but at the same time, like, you're a parent. There's some things you need to do.
I'm not somebody who likes to go back and blame people. I'm definitely a solution-based person, and I try to create opportunities that are the best situations for the most people. And I think that some people pride themselves on being polite and never sharing what's really going on. And to me, those are some of the most unsafe people, because there's so much room for projection and thinking that things are one way when they are not that way. It's far riskier to really say who you are. And when you're a kid, you can't. You don't have that safety. You're just like reading the room and trying to, what's the answer I say so that I still get taken to school, or I have a roof over my head. And as you get older, in my case, a little of me made Gail angry. So a lot of me I didn't think was ultimately safe. But that journey of coming into that real honoring of, we didn't pick our eye color, our height, our responses to stimulus. We're a goodie bag of weirdness. And you have to make peace with all parts of yourself and then decide, do I want to carry the bad wiring forward, or do I want to say it ends with me? And so those are some of the other things that I address in the book. And I give the reader that opportunity to try on how I think and how big I love. And I hope that's some of the stuff that is interesting. And it might read like science fiction to some people.
Did you ever feel like when you're growing up that you had when you met kids, or explaining what your family dynamic was like? Because for them, that may feel completely foreign, calling you parents by their first name. Did you just say, this is just the way it is? Or did you have an inclination to want to explain things at all?
We were the go-to house because people felt more free in my family's home. They could curse, they could get dirty, they could play with art supplies and get messy. And so those kinds of things, I moved forward into my own household. I love being the house that provides that kind of experience for my kids' friends and for my kid. So in terms of wanting to explain it to anybody, no, I like that aspect of it, but I craved the normalcy of soup when you're sick, or a hug when you're sad, or again, if you can, cursing as much as you want, to me wasn't as interesting as having the ability to have my feelings with the people that I cared so much about. So and in an artistic home, there's a momentum of chaos that's moving the creativity forward. And it's not a great environment for people to for the rest of the family to get their needs met.
Going back when I was watching that one episode of Letterman with you and your dad, I was like, you're only 14, but you seem very are like articulate. I would have been like nervous out of my mind there, sitting on stage with my dad on Letterman in New York. And were your folks like that? They put a lot of value in you communicating and being able to articulate yourself very well. Because I was sitting there going, she's only 14. How can you feel that seemingly comfortable?
My father was ultimately Sicilian, so I felt, yeah, he exuded the wattage of a mob boss, so I felt somewhat protected in that sense if something went off the rails. And also, my both of Gail and Frank, they were very much they were word people, and we all had gigantic vocabularies by the time we were, I don't even know what age. We could all quote the Jabberwocky probably by age 5. And because we had a famous father, there was also this sense of we represent this person in public. There was that sense that you have to be uh, just respectful and professional.
What were you up to besides going back to growing up? I know what was happening around the house, but where were your interests taking you? I don't know. Hobbies is not a hobby. The things you were doing besides the Zappa family thing, the thing that you're starting to carve out on your own.
Again, early on in my life, I Frank's music was being pumped into the house through an intercom system, and so sound was very prominent in my life, and every sound was a potential, again, a paint color for what my father called air sculpting. And I'm very auditory, and I just had a fascination with voices and cartoon voices. And when I tell a story about getting to meet the original Snow White and then being confused because she was a person, but she was also the voice. And then later on, getting to see Lily Tomlin perform and watching her transform into all these different kinds of characters. And so I think if you're lucky, you do get exposed to things that that you come into this world with these natural abilities, and something catches a spark catches fire because you're interacting with that thing. And for whatever reason, performing, sound, these kinds of things were very interesting to me. And I have an ear for that. And also because I was so hypervigilant, I was just always just paying attention to absolutely everything around me. And then growing up in show business in Los Angeles, California, and Hollywood, it just seemed like the natural progression. Like I didn't even feel like I had a choice to not go into entertainment. And because of how I was raised, where my father was at the top of the pyramid and I had to do everything in service of my father, acting was very similar. Somebody tells you where to stand. Somebody tells you the words to say. Somebody's deciding your clothing. It was unfortunately a natural. I sometimes wonder if I would have picked something else in another town.
What, like musically, what were you into when you were a kid?
It depended on the age. I really loved heavy metal as a teenager, to my father's disappointment. But he would bring music back from around the world. And so I was exposed to what they called at the time world music. So the Bulgarian Women's Music Choir and the Three Mustafas. And he brought back Lena Lovitch and Nina Hagen, but also the Modettes, but also Bach. And then he also brought back the first B-52s album. So that was really thrilling.
Really?
To get to hear that. And yeah, I like almost all forms of music. I just like it. It's just interesting to see how people express themselves.
With you and Dweezil, how did y'all end up on MTV? Because I have a recollection of that, but how often were you on MTV as a guest VJs? Which is a phrase I don't know. I've used the phrase VJ.
Yeah. I think in the course of a year, we probably did, I want to say 18 weeks out of the year. So we would go to New York for 2 weeks, maybe, and then shoot a bunch of stuff. But yeah, I think they found us because we were at that time doing television appearances here and there. And yeah, we just got lucky.
I remember back when I worked on the radio years and years ago, you had to watch MTV to know what was going on culturally. Pre-internet, something I think my kids like completely oblivious to, but moved starting West Coast, started going East Coast. Now everything's just instantaneous everywhere. And everybody watched MTV to know what was going on. And it's so weird now. I try to explain to my kids what MTV was, like videos, but what was that like to be a part of I don't want to use the word zeitgeist or whatever, but MTV was plugged in. You were part of it. What was that experience like?
I was a teenager, so it was amazing to be in the middle of the most fun thing at the most fun age, at the most fun time. That was really, that was, again, another way to meet some of my idols. What was so hilarious was I had a massive crush on, as a 19-year-old, I had a massive crush on Spalding Gray. Again, these people that would perform one person shows and tell stories. I guess I've always been interested in every single form of storytelling. I remember when I heard Sinead O'Connor and saw that video of her singing Nothing Compares to You, which was written by Prince. I couldn't believe that somebody else could write a song and she could bring it so fully to life and really tell the story that I wouldn't have heard had it just been a song. Like, she
Yeah.
understood the material so well that it elevated it to a stratospheric realm. And so again, I just always had my eyes and ears attuned to, is this thing a poem? Is this thing a song? Is this thing, what's the best way to express the idea that you catch in your butterfly net?
Okay. By the way, Priest, but if you hear it, a sound of in the condo building here, my neighbor's getting a new floor put
I
in.
can now,
So,
it's just one.
so there is no way to isolate that sound. One of the things I'm curious about is, and looking, I had this discussion with one of my kids not too long ago, but like you can look at any decade, 50s, 60s, 70s, and you can hear a song and plugs you into that era. And to me that after about the 80s, maybe part of the 90s, we really don't, it doesn't feel like we really have that anymore, as much anymore. What do you think? And I'm asking you to go on a limb here, but what do you think your dad would feel? What do you think Frank would feel about music industry now? What's coming out? And
Well, if you go with science and objects in motion tend to stay in motion, then yeah, he would have been a pioneer in every single realm. As something was developed, he'd take it to another level. He was an out of the box thinker and needle mover. I'm sure he would have found another way to express himself. Now it's a really difficult time because you could be canceled at any moment, but he had the temperament to withstand that kind of an idea. And I remember hearing a story about Richard Pryor and how he would go to I think it was the Comedy Store or something on a Monday, get booed and walkouts until Thursday or Friday. Then he'd get standing ovations and then he'd start again. And the artists that are around now that have that ability to withstand somebody with an iPhone or somebody recording something before you even have a chance to develop something. It's just a trickier time. You have to be much braver as an artist now. And I really appreciate when they take your phones and your devices away. So number one, enjoy the experience and not try to double experience it at the same time. And just that you give the artist the freedom and then you have that intimacy that you would have. That moment won't come again, that one singular. That's why seeing something live is so amazing.
it seems like comedians like Pryor or Carlin or guys like that they having the commentary out there that it was important. Music, same thing with music. Were comedians, was that part of the ecosystem as well growing up?
Not in my house, but certainly when I got out into the world and on my own, my father's humor was just, he was just the funniest person I knew. So of course I was still craving that kind of level of quick wit and his insights and the things he observed and reflect back as a sort of cultural anthropologist. And so then it made me, again, pursue the comedy world and see what are the different styles of comedy, mean-spirited comedy versus evergreen jokes that play in any room versus alternative storytelling, absurdist. There's all these different forms of it. And again, it's endlessly interesting and all of it funny. I remember one act that I really enjoyed. There were two guys, Andy Secunda, and I'm spacing on my other friend's name, Andy, another Andy. He does a Bananas for Bonanza podcast. Anyway, they did this bit and there were two vaudevillian characters that didn't get along anymore. And so much so that one had to come on by himself and he would do some of the setups and some of the punchlines. And then he'd leave the stage and then the other one would come on and do some of the punchlines and some of the setups. And so you as the audience member had to imagine what those things sound.
Yeah, it's like a build your own comedy show.
It was that combination of just that high intelligence plus that absurdity, which again, I was raised with. That's one of the ways I refuel. And that's one of the ways I got through the difficulty of writing the book was either watching revenge-based movies or seeing a lot of comedy.
It seemed like that your dad with him touring, going out for long stretches, it would just be you and the family at home. What was it like when he was out on tour and this now the family unit is now four of y'all? Five.
5 of us, yeah. There's Amit, Dweezil, Diva, and me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
I think in families, the birth order, the gender, all of these things, again, universal ideas, and I tell my version of it. But and when I look back at all the memories, I realized that I saw, as the oldest, I saw my siblings as shoulder to shoulder with me, and
mhm.
they saw me as another thing standing over them. And I didn't realize that until I put myself in their shoes as I was writing some of these stories. Originally, my dream was that we write a shared memoir, a family.
That'd be
I hadn't
cool.
seen it done before, and I thought that'd be really interesting because then we could map it on a timeline, and each one of us could fill in some little gap there. But yeah, life changed, and in some ways, we all got different parents, really, because you grow a little bit and you try different stuff, and then the kids, everyone's born with a different temperament. So then all these factors come into play, but there is that common sense of humor, that common intelligence, that common artistic side. So there is shared history there. That's that's my middle name's Unit because I was the firstborn and we became a family unit. So family is
Mhm.
huge. It's just hugely important to me. And I think anytime you're missing something, you become an expert in how valuable that thing is.
You mentioned the acrimony and just the way things materialized or devolved with Gail towards the end. Did you pick up on any of that, like when Frank was on tour and just be the family together? I caught a note that you felt like you were not a parent, but you were there helping raise your siblings. Were you ever upset that was being maybe put upon you, or did you embrace it like you dug the fact you were able to help out with a family like that?
It depended on the day, but overall, I definitely felt like I was robbed of a childhood, but I felt like I was opposite two people who are also robbed of a childhood, and it keeps going and
Mhm.
going. And so that's why I say blame is not the interesting. It's not interesting to me. What is interesting is looking at a dynamic and then saying, I'm not going to participate in this dynamic when I am able to not participate in it. As a kid, you're stuck in there. And so you're just working with those systems. But I just knew there was another way. There was the combination of the messaging from I Dream of Jeannie on television and Bewitched, these messages that girls didn't, they were just going to become nurses. There was that side of things. So being a caretaker was built in, and also my father was
Mhm.
Italian, so the idea of being barefoot and pregnant, there was some of that in the house, but there was also get out there and make something of your art, your life. And so there were these double messages, and so I remember hearing that expression, it's never too late to have a happy childhood. And I thought, I don't even understand what that means. But as I get older, I realize, yeah, there's certain times when you can go back and move old parts of yourself into present time, and you can give yourself experiences of that you didn't get to have when you were younger. And but that there's no timeline on when you can experience some of that stuff. You're just a little.
But becoming a mother, did that kind of help facilitate that? Like you were maybe at the same time your daughter's experiencing something, you together with her, you're diving into that
Oh
experience? Or are you
yeah, and I
creating things that you didn't have when you were a kid?
Yeah, and then because I was such a hypervigilant, dedicated learner, I read every parenting book that I could get my hands on, and a couple made just I love so much. One was Alfie Kohn's book on, I forget the name of it, but it's about empathy-based parenting. Another one was Dan Siegel's book on brain development and what you can really expect from somebody, and somebody's brain isn't even developed until they're 26 years old. And then the work of Marshall Rosenberg was another person, and that really helped me to understand just how not fun my childhood was. Because one of the exercises was you stand on a chair and you yell at an adult and you say, you get a timeout. And it's absurd, right? If you're standing over someone and you're an adult standing on a chair and you're screaming at somebody to take a timeout, that would never happen. So why would you do it to somebody who is completely tiny, who you're just a wall of anger coming at somebody who doesn't have any of the ability to, like, timeouts are literally ridiculous. You wouldn't say that to an adult. So why would you say to somebody who cannot possibly comprehend the information you're trying to impart? It's awful.
Yeah, you said that your brain doesn't develop. I remember like your frontal cortex, something doesn't develop till later. But your mother, she was 20, 21 when you were born, something like that.
Yeah, very young. And my dad was,
Mm.
maybe she was 21. Yeah. And my dad was, I think, 25 or 26. So yeah, they were still kids.
I'm enjoying getting into the book, but I want to keep trucking,
Yeah.
through it. The interesting thing is when you look back on your childhood through adult eyes, you just see things a little differently. Again, you forgive some things but you also make decisions on how you're going to do things differently with your kids. And you recognize even though you're trying to do things differently, you can feel those echoes of things popping back up, those habits or whatever. Did you have any epiphanies when you had your daughter that
Yeah, wherever my parents fell short, I also didn't have a tool for handling that situation. Even now, as my kid's 20 now, and we're in some territory where I'm like, I didn't learn this lesson either. We're learning the same thing together. But it's the difference is being able to say, I don't know. Let's find somebody who can help with that, or I don't know, but we'll walk each other all the way there. You won't be alone in whatever you're going through, or saying sorry for an injury, preparing a rupture, deepening intimacy and that connection when you do repair a rupture. This kind of stuff that didn't happen growing up, and for whatever reason, I just had an interest in creating more of that. Again, whenever you're missing, there's an opportunity to become an expert in it. And so alongside the Bewitched stuff, there was also Nelson Mandela and Gandhi and Sister Helen Prejean and these exemplary people that they had a generosity of spirit and a clarity of mind. I sought out teachers that had that clear seeing, and so that I could.
Well, they're right there when you said you sought out teachers and
Yeah.
you sought out like us mentors and things like that. So you saw the deficiency and or almost organically you're trying to reach out and grab stuff. Did your daughter, what did she think about the book, or did she already know all these stories already, or was this kind of new material for her?
She's not going to read the book, but that's fine. Who wants to read something about their parents? Boring. But one funny story. I don't think it got in the book, but one of the first times my kid actually got like a true taste of Gail was we were flying to Europe for the first time, and Gail bought fancy business class seats for all of us. And I said, "Oh, can Matilda sit by the window?" And Gail came nose to nose with my kid and was like, "What makes you think you deserve the window seat?" And then we hadn't taken off yet. And my kid just started screaming. And I just said, "Cry as long and as loud as you want." And all the people on the plane are like, "Why can't you shut that kid up?" And I was like, nope. Because I wish somebody would have said, "Cry as long and as loud as you want." Because then you come into...
How old was she when y'all were doing that? About 4. Oh, okay.
This is the firstborn grandkid. Who says that to a kid? And then later in the flight, Gail walked over and said, "You can sit next to me now." And my kid said, "No, thank you."
So she's got a little chutzpah from an early age.
Yeah.
So what's the arc of her experience as far as what she's up to? Creatively, is she into anything artistic kind of like you, or do you see parts of you in her as far as like how she likes to create?
I hope I've created an environment where there's that freedom to explore in any direction. Definitely a storyteller, got my father's musical genes, that autodidact thing, that perfectionism thing that we all have. Yeah. And we'll see where that takes her.
She has the same birthday as as Frank. Is that right?
Yeah, it was just so thrilling. That was just such a gift. It just made me so happy.
You had an experience where if nothing else, obviously the whole book's a memoir. You're doing a lot of reflection. And I can't imagine doing that. I wouldn't even know where to start. How did you know where to begin the story? Did you already have everything lined up in your head, or were you just grabbing your journals and just...
I did it in a couple of different ways. One way was I had a friend who was a documentary filmmaker. He did the film Eat That Question, which is an amazing documentary about my father's classical music journey. And he took 5 years to find interviews with my father. And so the whole movie is just in my father's own voice. It's just a seamless stories, Frank telling his own experiences. And so he suggested that I start with gathering like a documentary filmmaker and just gather materials. And so then I went to friends and I said, "Hey, have I ever told you a story that you thought was weird or funny or that you think somebody else would enjoy?" And so then I would write about those things. And then I was again building a timeline of when a moment I felt one way before the event and then another way after the event. And the way your brain works with trauma is the events you'll loop on the memory just crystallizes around those events. I then mapped those on the timeline. And yeah, and then I just tried to write it like I was like almost like a cold case or a mystery you're following, or I don't know. I just tried to just tell it like a police report.
Even though there were heavy things, for lack of a better way of putting it, going on around you, you didn't write it in a very heavy way. There was a little levity, little humor to your own introspection. I thought it was charming. It was cool. I really enjoyed it.
Another friend said to keep it manageable, he said it's just 5 pages 27 times. And so you can just break it off into smaller pieces and then you treat it like it's a pancake. The first pancake always sticks to the pan in my experience. And so then you just keep refining it and refining it. It is true. Writing is rewriting.
How's the relationship with your siblings now? Of course, you and Dweezil, the way Gail kind of will or lack thereof, where it should have been, that drew a line between the four of y'all. Has that kind of been repaired a little bit, do you think?
Definitely been repaired, or it's starting to be repaired with Amit. I just did his podcast called Rock Tales, and that was a lot of fun. He read the book, and it was really fun to see his reactions. I won't say what he talked about. You can watch the Rock Tales thing, but he really was a brother to me. He was like, I love this, but why did you talk about the and so that was really fun to have him really behaving like a brother. But I think my goal was that that it had the potential to create some healing there, because we have a shared history, and I hope that I would have moments that were just, I don't know, just that they'd all remember something about those times. They don't have to remember it the way I remembered it, but maybe it would just spark a memory of their own, or they'd see it another way.
Is Dweezil still performing? Is he still out there?
He's out there playing music. Dweezil will know our father differently than any of us know him, because he can play the music. And so few musicians can even play the music. Dweezil's in a class by himself. He's in a league of his own, just on just the musicianship level. And he's just devoted to the music getting out there for the fans that have loved my father forever, and to introducing the music to new audiences. So he's really, he's dedicated.
Yeah, it's so funny you said the fans. How does it feel when people come up to you and just, oh my God, and they have their anecdotes about growing up listening to music? Is it something that, do you enjoy it?
Of course, yeah. It's another story about my father. I just heard about some interactions the other day. I heard a story about how my father yelled at somebody, and I wonder if he actually yelled or if he just said something so directly that it felt like yelling. But yeah, my father never raised his voice ever. He was always level-headed and never vindictive, but he was very clear. And so it's fun to hear those kinds of stories. There's people that come up to me and tell me about how wonderful Gail was, and I just say, I'm glad you had a positive experience with her. But everyone has different encounters. We're different to other people. I'm sure you've got mortal enemies and people that think you're wonderful.
Sometimes you have no idea about where you set in people's minds.
I read something about C.S. Lewis, I think, when he was talking about, I think it was C.S. Lewis, talking about the loss of a friend. And there was a group of friends, and they were all friends together. And when this particular friend died, they all were grieving not just the friend, but who they were opposite that friend. And I thought that was such an interesting idea. And then I read something recently too about, in terms of storytelling, how we're all conditioned to the Joseph Campbell model, where it kind of all works out in the end, but grief doesn't really follow those same rules. And it's wrong to impose that kind of expectation on a story like that. And so another aspect of my book is I feel like I'm in the conversation about grief literacy, which Mirabai Starr, that's that term that I heard from her. She's an amazing writer. And I think, especially in America, we don't know how to be with more difficult feelings. And I hope that this book helps people just feel a little bit, I don't know, more compassionate towards themselves.
You said something is the only way to get over it is go through it.
Yeah.
I think I picked up something with it, and I agree with it. It's so funny that Alan Watts, we used to work on the radio in LA, I would listen to him. It was interesting that we are not a society that deals with kind of the grief thing, and not like certain Asian cultures, there's a process.
I know I heard that expression, we're all just walking each other home in the end. And I say we're also all growing each other up. And when they say hurt people, unwell hurt. People that are truly hurt don't want anyone else to suffer what they've been through. They want people to not suffer.
Before we get running, I always do something I call my 7 questions, just a little bit of fun I like to do with folks. A little extra get to know you. Fact that your family is Italian, I really want to know this one. What is your favorite comfort food?
Tea.
Oh,
That's why I have a tea company. I have a tea company that people can drink my tea. In fact, for my book, I made a special tea because you can smell a book and now you can taste a book.
what's the name of your tea
Moon
company?
Unit Tea. You can get it on my
Moon
website.
When you're okay, very good.
Yeah.
Now you got me because I'm trying to not have as much coffee, but I'm trying to integrate more tea into my life here. But so tea, very good. Now you're going to talk story, have coffee or tea with someone for 3 people for a few hours, living or not. Who would those 3 people be you would like to bring together, sit down and talk story with?
Bell Hooks. She wrote amazing books one of the books was all about love. She's amazing. Clarissa Pinkola Estes. I'd like to sit down with her. She's still alive. She wrote Women Who Run with the Wolves. Gabor Mate.
You're the second person to mention Bell Hooks.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Okay, it was Melissa. Okay, now it's going to bug me now because I can't remember. It's one of 2 people.
Andy Daly. That was the other
Hooks.
Andy. Sorry, go ahead.
Kind of the same way I'll remember something later. I was like, I got it. I triumphed over my memory. So very good. So I got to go check out Bell Hooks because if you're the second person who's mentioned Bell Hooks, I've got to go do a little reading. Now, if we're going to go back, young you, first celebrity crush.
Oh, Dennis Johnson. Can I have a fourth? I love his writing too. Okay, go ahead.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Absolutely.
Question about a crush? What?
Your first celebrity crush when you were a kid, you're just infatuated with something about them.
I think Derek from the Bay City Rollers was before Sean Cassidy. I definitely always had a thing for drummers and cleft in the chin. I just thought that was the dreamiest thing in the world. So I think that was, but I also liked the redhead singer from ABBA. She also had a cleft. I think it's Frida.
Well, it begs the question of what is it about the drummers that's interesting? What drew you to the drummer?
I don't know, but it was my father's first instrument. I married a drummer that we divorced when he became a guitar player. There's just something about the drums. It hits my body in a way that I just love it.
He was in Matchbox 20, right?
Yeah, he still is, yeah.
Still is. But yeah, being on the radio in my heyday was the 90s, at least 1 song per hour. Them, and I realized that's almost 30 years ago. Now, if you're going to be going to an exotic island, it's somewhere you want to be, and it's like at a resort, but you're going to be somewhere a year, no internet, streaming, nothing. You can only bring 1 album, and you can only bring 1 movie or DVD, something you can watch over and over again. And because I'm speaking with you, we can throw a book in there as well, but something that you just are not going to tire of.
Heaven Can Wait would be my movie, or Little Darlings, but probably Heaven Can Wait. And the book, I'd probably bring a journal. That would help. And then for music, probably Fiona Apple, something by Fiona.
The next question, if you go from stem to stern, from the time you get up to the time you go to bed, what are the component parts for you of a perfect day?
Time in nature, tea, a bath, connecting with somebody whose face lights up when they see me, and likewise, time with my kid. Maybe that's the same person, hopefully. Making a home-cooked meal, 5 ingredients or less.
I don't follow recipes, but if I got to follow a recipe, I'm just not going to do it. Just a few things, throw it. Yeah. My daughter Emma she was studying in Spain, and this past fall, she said, I just want to come home and eat something out of a bowl. She was just loving the food, but
I eat a lot of whole bowl meals. I think I have 3 plates to my name. Everything else is full, and I just serve everything in the bowl. And I love a spoon. I love especially a soup spoon or a teaspoon. So at some point I'll be touching something tactile, and then probably just making some art at some point.
Okay, very good, very good. Now, if you weren't doing this, if you're not doing just one thing, but if you were not predominantly doing what you're doing now, where would you find joy as a vocation besides this?
Choreography or lighting, design. Yeah, those are 2 areas that appeal to me.
The last question I got for you. If you were to jump into that DeLorean and go back when you were 16 years old, let's say, and you got a piece of advice for yourself to either make that moment better or maybe put yourself a little bit different track, what would that piece of advice be to 16-year-old?
Invest in yourself and don't worry so much about other people. But I think I might just, as an adult, going back to that, it's never too late to have a happy childhood. I think I might try being selfish for a year. I think I could probably knowing me, I'll probably maybe get an hour a week. When I say selfish, that's a judgy label, but the idea of just investing in myself and just listening to me, that's something that is that, again, it's a theme in the book. It's a portrait of what they're now calling toxic femininity, where you just give and have no needs. And breaking that pattern is part of that story too. So
I think especially once you become a parent, then your mind is all automatically just organically shifted into focusing on needs of someone else. And I think unless you're good for yourself, it's really difficult to maximize
Yeah.
what you can do for somebody else. Yeah, Moon, I appreciate you taking time out with me today. This was very enjoyable, and I'm really enjoying the
Thank you
book.
so
And this is
much.
going to
Yeah.
be, I love writing
Mhm.
screenplay types. Oh, one last question, actually, is that something you've thought about doing? Is writing a
Well,
screenplay?
yeah,
Maybe
I actually do screenplay writing. I have two different writing partners, and that's where I enjoy that back and forth experience, that collaboration, that time.
yeah, because you mentioned the lighting design. So imagine in a screenplay, you're thinking in a
Yeah,
visual
you're the
way as
director,
well.
you're
So that's
the set designer, you're the location scout, you're the actor, you're
casting
exactly,
director. Yeah.
yes.
Whenever I'm writing, I'm always like, they say not to do it, but I'm always, when I'm writing, I'm like, I've already cast it in my brain. I know you're not supposed to do
I
that,
think it
but
helps actually, because then you
um,
can tap into the voice sooner, especially if that person has such a strong persona. Sometimes a character is just Ricky Gervais. I don't know why. I can get to some humor with if I put Carl Pilkington or Ricky Gervais in a role.
again, I appreciate your time, and I cannot wait to tell folks about the book. I don't read as much as I probably should, but I've really enjoyed getting into it.
Thank you so
Uh,
much. Yeah.
All right, there you go. Moon Unit Zappa. Great conversation. Really enjoyed the opportunity to go down memory lane a little bit, get a little insight, and have a chance to check out her new memoir. It is called Earth to Moon. Pick it up. Not only is it a great book, great story, personal story, but she's a great storyteller, a cool point of view. So one other thing, make sure to grab your phone, whatever device you use to listen to Story and Craft. Make sure to follow the show. That way you will find out, get a little notification every time there's a new episode. Ring that little bell, whatever your app does. Leave a review. That's always wonderful. Leave some stars. Whatever feels good, go for it. Just make sure to follow the show. It helps other folks discover the mischief we have going on here. Also, storyandcraftpod.com. That is the website. Just go there. You can find out about all past episodes, past guests, send me a note, whatever. It's always there for you. So go check it out. All right. So have a great rest of your day, your evening, week, weekend, whatever you got going on. Thank you for bringing me along. Appreciate it greatly. And we'll talk next time right here on Story and Craft.
That's it for this episode of Story and Craft. Join Mark next week for more conversation right here on Story and Craft. Story and Craft is a presentation of Mark Preston Productions, LLC. Executive producer is Mark Preston. Associate producer is Zachary Holden. Please rate and review Story and Craft on Apple Podcasts. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. You can subscribe to show updates and stay in the know. Just head to storyandcraftpod.com and sign up for the newsletter. I'm Emma Dillon. See you next time, and remember, keep telling your story.
Come on.